In 1963, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said during the March on Washington, "We are faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. This is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action." Can I get an amen?
Amen.
You know by now that First Unitarian Society has taken a vigorous and positive action. We have signed on as a plaintiff to a lawsuit challenging the Minnesota Constitution with a religious freedom claim. Specifically, we are challenging the law, the mandate that you just heard, that says fetal tissue that is the result of abortion or miscarriage must be buried or cremated. We say this is an affront to our values. Certainly, anyone may choose to have such fetal tissue buried or cremated, but to mandate it in the state code assumes a level of personhood that most of us do not. And it comes from one specific religious tradition to which we do not adhere. We say that it is wrong and that it must stop. Our theme this month is beauty. And I say there is beauty in institutional strength. We have history here at First Unitarian Society, 138 years of history. A congregation that was gathered to read the works of Charles Darwin and understand from a theological perspective, the perspective of ultimacy. Theology is the study of what is ultimate. That science, the methodology of science, provides us a pathway to ultimacy. We have a history here that includes members of the First Unitarian Society Alliance being instrumental in bringing Margaret Sanger here to First Unitarian Society. The story was she was going to give a talk over in St. Paul, and they were worried about violence at her talk. And First Unitarian Society, the Alliance, said, come on over here. I don't think that's how they said it. Come on. Yes, you can come here. We'd be glad to have you. That talk led to the formation, in some ways, of the Birth Control League. That was the forerunner of the Motherhood Protection League, which later grew into being Planned Parenthood of Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. That has a seed right here. We have a history. For decades, we have offered comprehensive sexuality education to our youth. We think that human sexuality is a gift that should be used with joy and responsibility. We think it's so important that we teach it in our Religious Explorers program. We have a history. Our ministers have spoken at the state capitol and other venues in support of robust reproductive health, rights, and justice. We are not new to this fight. And we are an institution. We are an institution. Our board of trustees, the representatives of duly elected representatives of this institution, have done a fantastic job in representing you in whether or not we would join this lawsuit. Yes, you may give an applause for the Board of Trustees. We started talking about this back in February, and boy, did they ask some good questions. I like being in a room with smart people. They make you think. Then we had a change in the Board of Trustees. Some people went off and some people came on, and those new members asked such good new questions. And finally, we got to the decision of yes, we would participate. It was not possible to share this information with the congregation at large because of legal strategy. And so the board wrestled with this. Do we have the right to make a decision on behalf of the whole congregation? Do we have the right to engage in risk on behalf of the whole congregation? And boldly, they said, yes, we do. One of the questions that I asked myself as we were trying to get to this yes is, how will we explain this decision looking back? 138 years from now, yes, we'll be here 138 years from now. How will we say we responded in the fierce urgency of now? It's an option to take a fierce and bold and affirmative action. This is the beauty of institutional strength. We're nimble. We've done our homework, and we're prepared for what is before us. Now I want to say a word about preparation and safety and how we share the news. Our board said, yes, we'll go forward if we have two committees. One's going to be a communication committee. How are we going to share this information out with our congregation, both inside and beyond our walls? How will we do that? Hello, beyond our walls. And we want a security team, members of the board and members of the staff and ministers. We want to talk about how we're going to be secure in our building. And really, the truth is, we've been having some conversations we should have had all along. This was just the impetus to do it. That's happy news. We think it's possible that we may have protesters. They tell me not to be upset if we don't. I've said in really nice language and in our communications, do not engage. Do not engage with protesters. Isn't that lovely? Don't engage. Somebody said at our meeting last week, you can't say that. Say, do not speak to them. We can't speak. And this is hard for us because, gosh, we want to talk. We want to talk it out. And let me tell you why your idea may be right or wrong. And let me share with you. You're sharing with me. That's what we like to do, right? We can't do that because if we have protesters are not here to debate. They are not here for a back and forth. Imagine if you went to a place that you completely disagreed with, you were 180 degrees from, and you took the time on a Sunday morning to go show up. Are you going to debate it? Well, I don't know, you might, but they are not. They will not do it. So when we say do not engage, we mean do not speak to the protesters. And here's why. It's fair to know why. Because people may want to engage you in conversation and then get to a confrontation so that they can then film us. Do you understand? If they can get us to a confrontation, and I don't care how good a speaker you think you are, I think I'm pretty good, but somebody could get under my craw, you know? Somebody could really get to me, somebody who's practiced and has that as a goal, and get me riled up, and then get me on camera saying something, and ooh boy, wouldn't that be a win for them and not for us? That's why. Okay, let me say one other thing. Now, if we have a protester who happens to come inside our assembly and is sitting nicely, peacefully, you may be here today. This has happened in another congregation that we know of, and here's what we're going to do. If it happens, whoever is the worship leader on that Sunday will kind of give the high sign to our musician. Oh, not yet. Oh, not yet. And we're going to sing them out. Our worship leader is going to say at whatever point that might happen in a service, That's not how we do assembly here. And so while the ushers and others escort this person, we're going to sing them out with the words we sing out our children on Sunday morning. How about that? We're not going to be ugly about it. We're not going to put our hands on anybody, but that's how we're going to do it, because we know who we are and we are prepared. Okay. Why is this a religious freedom claim? I'll tell you that back in March, one of the young lawyers from the gender justice program came over and spoke to us about all of these restrictions in Minnesota law, and two of you independently came up to young Ashlyn Kenzior and said, "Have you ever thought about bringing a lawsuit from a religious freedom perspective?" And she was cool, and she said, "That's a good idea." We were already thinking about it. Here's the thing. In the Minnesota Constitution, the protection for religious freedom is much stronger than it is in the U.S. Constitution. So we're not challenging this law against the U.S. Constitution. We're challenging it in Minnesota. Listen to this. This is section 16 in the Minnesota Bill of Rights. I bet you haven't...
This is a test. This is only a test. What if I said you were all baby killers?
Oh my goodness, we're going to sing this person out. Go now in peace, may love guide all your ways. Beauty be the blessings of your nights and days. Truth on your lips and kindness in your deeds. Faith to follow where the human spirit leads. Ha ha! Alan Callender, ladies and gentlemen. And Tui Rasmussen. Well done. Now you can say you've done it. Thank you. Minnesota Constitution. The enumeration of rights in this Constitution shall not deny or impair others retained by and inherent in the people. The right of every man to worship God according to the dictates of his own conscience shall never be infringed, nor shall any man be compelled to attend, erect, or support any place of worship, or to maintain any religious or ecclesiastical ministry against his consent, nor shall any control or interference with the rights of conscience be permitted, etc., 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 etc. Right? They can't do this. They cannot do this. And these laws, these mandates that you heard up here have just been quietly inserted into the Minnesota Code. And we say, it's not okay with us. We have also joined as co-sponsors of the statewide education campaign, Unrestrict Minnesota. That's unrestrictmn.org. Unrestrictmn.org. The language that you heard up here came right off that website. So I know you were taking notes really fast, but you can go on that website and see this language and see the actual where they came into law and so forth. It's a lot of really good information. We invite you to share that website with everybody you can. Here's what we learned in statewide focus groups of all different kinds. Even people who are supportive of a woman's right to make her own reproductive health care decision did not know about these restrictions, these mandates. How many of you did not know about many of these restrictions and mandates? Right. That's a lot of us. You have to be right in front of that, and that's by design. Right? It's been quietly slipped in here. So that's what we're doing. So let's talk a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about what I think of as the theological grounding of this. We don't talk about theology explicitly. We speak about it implicitly a lot. That's what our humanism is. Our understanding of ultimacy has a base in humanism. Whatever problems there are, it will be human beings that will solve them. There's not something outside that will come down to solve them. And by the way, that doesn't necessarily mean that you must be an atheist to be a humanist. You can absolutely be a theist and be a humanist. It just means that it is up to us to solve human problems. Here's my theology on this. Human beings are moral decision makers. Scriptures from all different traditions are filled with stories of human beings being moral decision makers. So even people who ascribe to Scripture recognize that human beings make and are enabled to and are given the capacity to be moral decision makers. We wrestle with ultimacy, with our lives, the reality of our lives, to make meaning and do the best with them that we can do. Some 60% of people who seek abortion care already have children that they are worried they can't care for financially. Get that. 60% of people who seek abortions already have children and they are worried that they can't care for them financially. They know what it is to make complicated parenting decisions, to sacrifice for their families, to remove the ability or to restrict the ability to make that most intimate decision is to remove agency. As far as I believe there is sin and evil, I believe that is evil and a sin. To remove human agency to make our best parenting decisions. I have something to say about in response to, and some of you have asked me, what can we say in response to that bumper sticker theology that says life begins at conception? Boy, that's neat and tidy. That's all you need to know. Life begins at conception. If it were only so neat and tidy, and I always think that if a theology or a philosophy fits on a bumper sticker, it's really not quite robust enough. Here's what I say to life begins at conception. Life began on this earth 3.5 million years ago. Every organism is a continuation of some form of life. You want to hear that again? Life on this earth began 3.5 million years ago. Every organism is a continuation of some form of life. I prefer the results of science to emotional manipulation. I prefer the results of science to emotional manipulation. Or I might say to someone who says, life begins at conception, I might say, that is your opinion. It is not my theology. My religious tradition teaches me that that language is manipulative and dangerous. That life is lived in nuance. Just this past week, there was an article in the Washington Post that was really hard to read. It was about it was about the fellow who took a gun into a yoga studio in Florida. This stuff is hard to read. Man, the news it'll just beat the heck out of you. That's why I'm so grateful for the music that you've given us this morning, this music of women composers. And there's something, especially in that Rachel Portman, that's very healing for me. This book was about control. This article was about control, and it said, I love this quote, misogyny is a gateway drug for extremists. Isn't that it? This was a quote of Heidi Beirich of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And she says misogyny, the hatred of women, the need to control women, is a gateway drug for extremists. Now, do I believe that everyone in the so-called pro-life movement is a misogynist that hates women and is on their way to extremism? I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I do believe there's a continuum. And I believe as we talk a great deal about authoritarianism in this room, in this congregation, and our need to fight back and refuse the movement toward authoritarianism, that misogyny is built into authoritarianism. I challenge one of you, please find me some group historically that has been authoritarian that is not also patriarchal. I believe that patriarchy and authoritarianism go hand in hand, and that is not us. And we affirm and we say that is not us, and that is too far. I want to say a word about language. I've said this elsewhere, and it's important for me to share this with you because we hear a lot in these, as we've talked about the bans, ban after ban after ban to abortion access. Well, there was no exception in the case of rape or incest. And that's truly horrible. That's truly terrible. But when we say that, we buy into the narrative that some abortions are okay and some are not. When we say, well, when they take care of economic injustice and racial injustice and guns in our streets, and if everybody has a living wage job and if everybody's got food security, then we won't have so many abortions. That may be true. But I don't want to rely on that happening because abortion is health care and health care is a right. Women of color have put forth the frame of reproductive justice to mean the complete physical, mental, spiritual, political, social, environmental, and economic well-being of women and girls based on the full achievement and protection of women's rights. That's where we're headed. The decision, Ruth Bader Ginsburg said this. I'd better close. Man, I can stand up here a long time and preach this. I love y'all. Gosh, I love y'all. I love my job. Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, the decision whether or not to bear a child is central to a woman's life, to her well-being and dignity. When the government controls that decision for her, she is being treated as less than a full adult human responsible for her own choices. We say here, we have a history. We are an institution with a history, with a present, and a future, standing firm for the rights of all people to make their own reproductive health care decisions.